All right, everybody, I'm going to do a quick little preview of textbook assignment number 1 from chapter 2 about period 2. So not all of period 2 is covered in this textbook assignment, but much of it is. So I put together a quick PowerPoint to kind of preview it. First of all, one thing to keep in mind, remember the Columbian Exchange, which started when Columbus had contact, that is continuing on to this day, certainly having an incredible impact around the world, especially during this time period, and continued on. Things like potato, maize, horses, disease, insects, ideas. You cannot underestimate the impact of Columbian Exchange during this time period. So first, when we're talking about English colonial expansion, we talk about the Puritans and the Separatists, and it's important to know the difference between the two. First of all, the Puritans, both were Christians, both believed in Calvinist beliefs. The Puritans wanted to purify the Church of England. They felt it was too Catholic. They wanted to just purify it while remaining a part of it. The Separatists, they believed that the Church of England was beyond redemption, and they wanted to leave the church. A small group of separatists were called the Pilgrims, who did the pilgrimage to the Americas in the 1620s, looking for religious freedom. So it's very important to understand the difference between the two. Again, the Puritans wanted to purify the church. The Separatists thought the church was beyond repair, and the Pilgrims were separatists. Puritan life in New England. We're going to learn more about a guy named John Winthrop. He was the governor of the Massachusetts Bay Colony, a model of Christian charity. City Upon a Hill was a famous sermon that he had given that we'll take a closer look at a little bit later. In Puritan society, they believed in predestination, the covenant of works, the covenant of grace. They created theocracy. Also during this time period was the Great Migration, where thousands of people from England migrated to the New World. So they migrated in droves, much different than did the French and the Spanish and the Dutch. So this time period was called the Great Migration, one of the many great migrations in American history. The Puritans were not religiously tolerant. Great example of this is Anne Hutchinson and Roger Williams, who were exiled for speaking out against the Puritan faith. Unlike the French and the Dutch, the Puritans had very bad relations with the Native Americans, the American Indians. There were many wars. They basically wanted to push the Native Americans off of their land, and they did not interact with them, for the most part, in a positive way. Also, the Puritans in New England set up what we would call neo-European communities with yeoman farmers that owned the land. So neo-European communities, they were basically trying to duplicate the communities that were in Europe in the New World. So they weren't outposts or trading posts like the French and the Dutch and the Spanish had. As mentioned earlier, the English were constantly fighting with the Native Americans for control over land. Two significant wars that took place: the War of 1622 in Jamestown down in Virginia, where many of the settlers were killed by Chief O, who was the chief of the Powhatans. And then you have Metacom's War, which occurred in New England began in 1675 and lasted about 3 years. And this was ultimately won by the colonists, and it ended Native American control of land in New England. So the significance: the War of 1622, many Jamestown settlers were killed by the strong empire, the Powhatans. And Metacom's War signaled the end of Native American control of land in New England. So the Chesapeake Colonies. When we talk about the Chesapeake Colonies, we're talking about Maryland and Virginia. Think tobacco. Tobacco was the cash crop of the Chesapeake Colonies. And back in England, they loved their tobacco, so there was incredible demand. It was incredibly profitable, easy to store and ship. So tobacco was the most important crop in the Chesapeake Colonies. The Chesapeake Colonies, Maryland in particular, was set up as a Catholic colony, and religion was not as important in the Chesapeake Colonies as it was in the Massachusetts colonies. The Act of Toleration was put in place so that there was freedom of religion, but as long as that religion was Christianity, believing in Christ. Also, a big thing about the Chesapeake Colonies was the headright system, where people would come to the colonies, they would have their passage paid for, they would be indentured servants, and they would work a period of time, and then in return they would receive land. In many cases, this was a very tough life for indentured servants. Many didn't even leave to the end of their servitude term to see their land, and the land that they got oftentimes was not good land. So this was eventually replaced by slavery. So period 2 during the Chesapeake Colonies, the headright system was very important. Also, another important thing from the Chesapeake Colonies was Bacon's rebellion. Nathaniel Bacon led a rebellion. It can be, the most important part of this is it can be seen as a battle between the rich and the poor, the elites and the working class. The end result and the big takeaway of Bacon's rebellion was that it led to more slavery in the Chesapeake Colonies and ultimately throughout the English colonies.